Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rabbi Stephen, Rav Shmuel ben Yehoshua, Rashbi in the house. So, this week, this Friday, we will be having a Friday night service. Last week we had Sherry Reader's Memorial, and once again, I thank you everybody for coming out. And we just thought we didn't want to have things too close together, so we decided to move it out. So this Friday night, I believe it's the 22nd at 6 o'clock. We'll have our potluck. We'll have a discussion, and then at 7 we'll have our service, and then maybe afterwards we'll have some dessert. We'll talk a little bit more, and it'll be a fun night, inspiring and everything. So we look forward to seeing you all. Let us know, and again. So this week is Chayei Sara, the life of Sara. And it talks about how Sarah was 127 years old when she died. And the way it talks about it, it says that she was at the age of 100. She was like a 20. She had the youth of a 20-year-old. As a 20-year-old, she had the youth of the beauty of a youth of a 7-year-old. And it makes that reference. The sages do. It also says, now, why does this particular portion open with Sarah dying? The consideration is that in the previous portion, and again, we have our flow of Torah portions, as Abraham was taking his only son Isaac up to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him, and Sarah heard about it. It was too much for her. She was advanced in years. It was her only son. She knew there was no way that there was going to be another miracle. She was not going to have another son, and it was just too much for her, and she died. The Kabbalists say that actually it was Satan that told her, and basically it was there for her demise. So there it is. Interestingly enough, we look at different things here. And this was really kind of an act of faith on Abraham's part, because God had told Abraham, okay, I will make you the father, Avraham, of a multitude of nations. And here he is telling him to sacrifice his son. So the question is Abraham doubting God? Well, where's the multitude of nations going to come from? It's supposed to come from my loins. And or was it just a test of Abraham's faith? Because the sages say that Abraham had 10 trials. This was one of them. This was probably the biggest one, but it was one of them. So Abraham was tested a lot to make sure that he was the one that was going to lead, this new nation, to bring out God's will to the people here, on this planet, if you will, to bring God's thoughts, God's will, God's law, God's teaching, so God had to make sure Abraham was the right one. So it's interesting because after Sarah dies, of course, we see how Abraham then really isn't mentioned much anymore. He goes on, he marries someone else called Keturah, and this is from the word Keturah, which is spices. And one commentary says that Keturah was part of those people that traded in spices. Other people say that, well, it was really Hagar. He remarried her now that Sarah wasn't around, and at this point it didn't matter. He'd given birth to Isaac. Basically, gave him, his legacy, to continue in the Jewish faith. And now basically he was kind of out of the picture. So they don't really mention Abraham until at the end of the portion when he dies. So at the beginning of the portion, we have Sarah's death. At the end of the portion, we have Abraham's death. So it talks about Abraham living, a nice ripe age, and it talks about Sarah living to a ripe old age. People tend to get hung up with this whole age thing. Once again, are we looking at miracles? Well, gosh, in the Torah there was all these miracles. Sarah at the age of 89 had was like, she, after she had gone through her menarche, and now she wasn't having her menstruation anymore, and all of a sudden she's got this youth, this beauty, she's able to have a kid, everything's working like it should, however many years ago, and she has a baby. That's a miracle. To have for a woman that old to have a kid. There are miracles like Noah and the ark, and the raining, and there's miracles about the snake in the garden. All these people living Adam lived to 930 years, Noah lived to 960, Methuselah lived to 980 years, and some people say, well, that's not real That's ridiculous. People back then didn't live that long. Maybe they meant moons. Maybe instead of 127 years, it was 127 moons, which is just as ridiculous on the other side because that would make Sarah 10 years old. And people were living to maybe 30 or 40, maybe, but not to 10. There's another theory that says if you do the math, then when Isaac meets Rebecca, Rebecca is only 3 years old. So, did somebody miscalculate? And also, when Abraham took Isaac up, to sacrifice him, Isaac was 34 years old. Could have easily overpowered Abraham. So, oh, no, you're not doing this to me. But one of the reasons why Isaac got to have the legacy is because he was ready to go through with it. He knew it was going to happen. He said, okay. So Isaac now is ready to do the legacy. So do we want to get hung up on the years, or do we want to just really look at the message? People remember Aesop's fables. They're a message that's couched in a whole story, in a situation. Is the Torah the same way? Me personally, I believe what it says. I'm a rabbi, and the reason I cling to Judaism and cling to Hashem is because I accept the Torah as it is. Now, of course, we do a lot of questioning. We want to investigate. We want to see why. We want to see the hidden meanings. That's fine. Do we investigate to doubt it? What's the point? What's the point? You can say, well, all this is made up. This is absolutely not real. Okay, but thou shalt love your neighbor as yourself. Is that fiction? Don't steal. Don't murder. Don't covet people's belongings to the point, and this is why that's a commandment, to the point where you're going to do harm to them to get their things. That's not false. That's not imaginary. That's not a fairy tale. Those are real laws. And the point is, it comes from an absolute authority. That is Hashem. That is God. And that's why we study Torah, because we want to see God's will. Let's say you don't believe in God's will. Let's say you don't believe in God. I'm an atheist, okay? You have to believe in laws of the universe. You have to believe that the earth goes around the sun in a certain way, and you have to believe that, the seasons come and go according to a cycle. You have to believe in gravity, because why are we not flying off the earth, okay? So it's the same God that created those laws, that created all of this. He wants us all to live in harmony, just like the universe and the planets and the solar systems, just as the laws of nature, just as life begins, just as we have all this life on this planet that's there for a reason. There's an ecology, okay? It all fits together in some gigantic jigsaw puzzle. So we hung up on the years. Maybe there's another moral to this. The fact that they're such people, and this is another way it's explained, they were so righteous, they were so pure in their souls that they lived that long. Yet that purity came out in their physical being. So, think about it. So now, we need to continue the lineage. So, Abraham sends his servant, Eliezer, and he had lots of servants and lots of people around him. And by the way, they were his followers. He was like the sage, and they were his disciples. So, he makes Eliezer promise, makes him sign an oath, makes him give an oath, and he puts his hand on his thigh. And thigh, of course, is in kind of apostrophes. It's a euphemism for his genitalia. Now, think about this. Abraham made a covenant with Hashem by circumcising himself. Why? Why is that so critical to being Jewish? Because that's where we give life. And we're giving God's life. God gave us the capacity to procreate. And that's why we're doing it on that particular organ. In Kabbalah, they talk about Yesud, which is the lowest sephirot. And the sephirot, the circles, are how God materialized the physical world that we see. So by doing that, Eliezer swears kind of his life. He kind of takes a life oath. Now here's some trivia you're going to enjoy. We know that the scientific name, the biological name of a man's reproductive organs is his testes. Well, believe it or not, that's where the word testimony comes from. Same root. Just learned that the other day. Testimony, because you're swearing on a person's life. You're swearing on their life-giving capacity. So think about that next time you watch a court show. So, just some trivia. So now Eliezer goes, and he knows that the woman that he's going to meet for Isaac has to be righteous. So he goes to his own people, and in a way, this is the first instance of genetic manipulation. Remember Star Trek, the eugenics wars, all that, and we talk about genetically modified whatever. This was an attempt at creating a people who had the same characteristics, but the inner, the emotional, the spiritual characteristics. So we wanted to find somebody who had the same genes of goodness and righteousness. And that's why he went back to those people. That's why he had the idea that the characteristics in his head that the woman that he would find for Isaac was going to water the camels, make sure, give him hospitality, and had that goodness in her, and that person was Rebecca. So we'll leave it at there. Shabbat Shalom, and hope to see you at services Friday night. 6 o'clock's potluck, 7 o'clock's the service. We'll have dessert, we'll talk, we'll do a little Torah study, and Shabbat Shalom, and as always, thank you for tuning in and listening.